The New Jersey Devils look to build on a very successful 2022-2023 season. They've already re-signed Jesper Bratt to a new deal, but what other moves are coming down the pike? Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils joins us to discuss that coming up on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can also now hear us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search for Locked On NHL. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Devils, Trey Matthews. And Trey, already a bit of an eventful offseason for the Devils with Jesper Bratt re-signing. Your thoughts on the deal and whether it was a good bargain for the Devils?
I say it was a good bargain for the Devils because I think the ultimate goal was to make sure that Bratt's annual salary was under Jack Hughes' threshold, which was $8 million. And they were able to do that by $1 million, and half of the money he'll be making is from signing bonuses. So it's been a long time coming because this was the third time in the last 4 seasons in which Bratt did not have a deal lined up for next year. And Jack Hughes was also expressing his frustrations during the exit interview, saying like, look, if you really want to come back to New Jersey, you need to get it done. You can't just say you want to come back. You got to put your money where your mouth is. And the $1 million question that you asked, Gil, or I guess the $63 million question in this case, was it a good bargain? Yes, it was. And now there's still enough room to re-sign Timo Meier. I recently spoke with Tom Fitzgerald, and he said that the goal is to re-sign Meier to an 8-year extension. But worst comes to worst, the Devils will own his rights for one more season. However, once that season is up, because now since the arbitration process is occurring, that his qualifying offer goes from $10 million to $8.5 million because the team recently filed an arbitration for Meier's contract. And obviously the hearings don't happen until late July or early August. But what the Devils are doing in this case, they're buying themselves some time and they're making that qualifying offer just a bit cheaper. But that's worst case scenario. And obviously you don't want Meier to become a UFA come next offseason. Now, another deal that the Devils were able to do was they traded away their longest tenured player in Damon Severson to the Columbus Blue Jackets for a third-round pick. Now, it was sad to see Severson go, but it had to be done because his original contract with the Devils, it was $25 million total. And now with the Blue Jackets, it's $50 million total. Now, this is a weak free agent market, and Severson would have been one of the more sought-after players. So Fitzgerald did the second sign and trade in NHL history. He pulled the rabbit out of his hat, and he was able to get something out of Severson. It was a third-round pick. Maybe if they would have traded him last year or the year before that, they could have gotten something a little bit more. But I'm glad that Fitzgerald was able to get something out of Severson as opposed to nothing because the Devils hold his right. Well, hypothetically would have held his rights until July 1st when noon hit.
And now, of course, he will be playing for a division rival, so there will be a little extra juice the first time the Blue Jackets and the Devils face off this coming season.
Yeah, I mean, for the Blue Jackets, I think it's a solid pickup on their end because I know you guys have talked about it in the past on Locked On NHL, but obviously before Severson, they got Ivan Provorov. So in terms of just getting Provorov and Severson, not what I had personally on my radar, but it's pretty solid for them because both of them not spectacular, but solid when it comes to a hockey standpoint. So I'm happy for Severson. He deserves to get paid. He deserved his pay raise, but ultimately his role just diminished with the Devils organization. I still think he could be a top 4 defenseman. Obviously, he's listed as an offensive-minded defenseman, but given Dougie Hamilton, Ryan Graves, and their roles with the organization, Severson was just, unfortunately, just thrusted out of that top 4 defenseman slot. And that's why he was paired alongside with someone like Kevin Ball during the playoffs and for a good chunk of the season, because Severson was unfortunately on that third defensive line pairing.
You talked a little bit about Timo Meier. What do you think it will take to get him signed to a long-term deal? And what would you place the odds are that he does sign a long-term deal this offseason as opposed to going forward with the arbitration?
Well, Fitzgerald in his recent media availability seemed rather confident. And when we were speaking to him, he said that the goal is to re-sign him to 8 years. And I think it's going to be the same thing as Bratt's circumstance, which is, where do you agree on financially? Now, for the goal for Bratt, like I said moments ago, was to make sure that he re-signed under $8 million, that huge threshold. However, for Meier's sake, because he's such a unique player, because not only is he able to score, he's able to provide toughness, he's playing in front of the net, he's using his strength to his advantage. Obviously, he was a big help on the power play for the Devils. I am willing to go over $8 million annually for Timo Meier, because if you think about it, last offseason, the Devils were interested in Matthew Tkachuk and also Johnny Gaudreau. Hypothetically, if both those players were on the Devils roster, they would have been making more than Jack Hughes. And for the time being, Dougie Hamilton is making more money annually than Jack Hughes. So I know Tom Fitzgerald said that the goal was to make sure that no forwards surpass Hughes and his annual salary, but I'm okay to do it for someone like Meier just because he's such a unique player. We really need his grittiness. We need his toughness. We need his physicality, and he's a 40-goal scorer. He's capable of doing it. So a player of his caliber doesn't come around too often. So for Meier, it's just a matter of like, how much does he want to get paid annually? And like I said, after the first domino piece has fallen with Jesper Bratt, now it gives Fitzgerald more room, because now the Devils have $26.4 million in cap space available to try to negotiate something, because prior to Bratt signing his extension, they had $34 million in cap space available. So Meier will be back in a Devil sweater. For how long and for how much, we're just going to have to wait and see. But Fitzgerald seemed very confident when speaking to the media and updating us in regard to Meier and his contract situation. And for what it's worth, Meier was working out in some Devils gear just a few days ago. Normally, I take that stuff with a grain of salt, but just to give you guys some, I guess, insight, because people were making the rumors saying that Meier didn't seem too happy with the Devils organization. I talked to him about how he felt like his skill set was utilized throughout the course of the year, because when he left the San Jose Sharks, the scoring numbers went down. However, his physicality, his aggression, and just his overall assertiveness was definitely a big X factor for the Devils in the playoffs and to finish out the rest of the regular season.
All right, Trey, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find the podcast and where they can find you on social media?
You can find me at TreyMatt4, TreyMatt, and the number 4. And you can find Locked On Devils wherever you get your podcast from. Like Gil said at the top of this recording, we're available on SiriusXM now, and also subscribe to Locked On Devils on YouTube. As for the show, you can find it at Locked On Devils.
Very good. Trey, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. Well, it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.